In Montana, a murdered woman is found stuffed in the trunk of her car. With little physical evidence to go on, investigators struggle to catch her killer. A seemingly healthy 33-year-old woman dies in her sleep. Tennessee police must determine if her death resulted from natural causes or murder. In Ohio, a woman abandons her husband and 2 children. But a routine investigation reveals that her disappearance may not have been intentional. A well-executed homicide can baffle even the most skilled investigator. But forensic examiners look beyond the obvious to find proof of a killer's guilt and expose the elements of murder.
Panic fam, I'm Hannah, and if it's 2 a.m., the lights are off and the popcorn has gone cold, you know, it's Panic TV time. Welcome. If you survived this, and this, congratulations, all right? Congratulations, but your luck runs out here.
Settled in the heart of Big Sky country, the city of Great Falls, Montana is surrounded by the majestic Rocky Mountains to its west and the Little Belt Mountains to its east. On an October morning, a man hiking along the secluded banks of the Missouri River stumbled upon several ID cards. They belonged to a young woman. Concerned, he alerted police. Deputies from the Cascade County Sheriff's Department responded to the call. At the river's edge, they found additional ID cards belonging to the woman.
Susan Galloway.
Police were familiar with the name. 27-year-old Susan Galloway had been reported missing the previous day. Unsure what to make of the findings, officers from the boat patrol were called in to drag the river. 20 feet from shore, they signaled they had snagged a woman's purse. Inside were more of the missing woman's ID and credit cards.
What'd you find?
There was also $100 in cash. But there were no signs of Susan Galloway. Cascade County Police contacted the missing woman's parents and brought them in for an interview. The family was alarmed when they discovered that their daughter and her vehicle were gone. Susan had recently become engaged, and she seemed so happy.
Would tell me anything.
Her fiancé, Craig Smith, was stationed at the nearby Air Force Base.
You did pretty good.
The couple often helped out at the business that the Galloways owned. Susan was a devout Mormon. And though Craig wasn't, he had agreed to convert so the two could marry. The family planned to give the couple ownership of the store as a wedding present. They couldn't understand why Susan would just take off without a word. Veteran detective Ken Anderson was not optimistic.
Well, finding the identification indicated that Susan Galloway did not, in fact, just leave town or drive away in her vehicle without saying goodbye and that sort of thing, because she certainly wouldn't have left her identification and money behind.
Police arranged to interview the missing woman's fiancé. Craig Smith had no idea where Susan could have gone. He last saw her the night before she disappeared. After leaving a dinner party, Susan dropped him off at his apartment around midnight. He hadn't heard from her since. The detective was curious about a bandage on Smith's hand.
What happened to your hand?
He explained that he had accidentally cut himself with a knife. A few hours after Susan dropped him off, he woke up thirsty. He tried to open a frozen can of orange juice, but was having trouble. He grabbed a knife, but it slipped as he tried to pry open the can. His car wasn't running, and he walked to the Air Force Base where he was stationed to have a medic treat the wound. Police later confirmed he had visited the medic that evening. The search for Susan Galloway was going nowhere. Three days later, a power company employee working at the Rainbow Dam spotted something on a hill across the river. He decided to go check it out. When he arrived at the spot, he found a car that had plunged down the hillside. The vehicle appeared to be caught up on some brush. Police and crime scene technicians were contacted and responded to the scene. A check on the vehicle's tags revealed the car was registered to missing 27-year-old Susan Galloway.
Watch for the evidence.
Sergeant Anderson made his way down the hill. Through the window, he observed a key in the ignition. There didn't appear to be anyone inside. But on the back of the vehicle, he noticed streaks of blood. There was also what appeared to be a footprint on the trunk. Then Anderson took a closer look inside the car.
The rear cushion of the back seat had pulled away from the trunk area, and at that point in time I could see a body inside the trunk of the car.
The woman matched the description of Susan Galloway, and it appeared she had been murdered. Police towed up the vehicle and began searching for clues. Inside the car, technicians found large blood smears on the front passenger seat. They also recovered several shards of broken green glass stained with blood. The exterior of the vehicle was thoroughly photographed. The victim's body was transported to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. The lack of evidence found near the car led police to believe that she had been murdered elsewhere and then brought to the hillside. A dog was brought in to track the victim's scent. A mile from the car, he alerted to a partially dug hole.
Sergeant Anderson, S8E5, come on up. I think we have a crime scene.
More of the victim's blood was found. It appeared the suspect brought the woman to this spot, finished the kill, and then attempted to bury the victim, but for some reason gave up. The medical examiner confirmed the victim was in fact Susan Galloway. Pieces of green glass from a 16-ounce soda bottle were found embedded in her skull and neck. They had severed her carotid artery, and as a result, Susan had bled to death. Now, detectives had to find out who had murdered Susan Galloway and why. But with few clues and no obvious suspects, they knew it would not be easy. Police in Great Falls, Montana had few clues in the murder of 27-year-old Susan Galloway. The young woman had been brutally beaten with a soda bottle, placed in the trunk of her car, and then sent down a steep embankment. No usable prints were found on the glass or in the victim's vehicle. Hoping to identify a suspect, investigators released details of the crime through the media. A short while later, they got a tip.
He knocked on my door.
A man stationed at the local Air Force base believed he had information.
Asked me
About what time did he come to the room there?
He said that on the night Susan disappeared, he had seen her fiancé, Craig Smith.
about 2 in the morning.
Smith had come by the barracks in the early morning hours.
What's up? I was out with the guys.
He noticed his friend was carrying a bundle of dirty clothing.
I was out with some guys. What's wrong with your hand?
He also noticed a gash on Smith's hand.
Listen, man, I was out with a girl. And
Smith
I don't
told him he had cut it with a knife. He was on his way to see the medic for treatment and asked his friend for a ride home after that was done. Smith had also told the airman that he had been out drinking with friends and got stranded.
He had
In fact, he asked his friend to keep the story quiet because his fiancée, Susan Galloway, wouldn't have been happy about it.
been left at the bars.
The airman's story contradicted Craig Smith's claim that on the night of the disappearance he had gone to bed soon after Susan had dropped him off. Sergeant Ken Anderson was suspicious.
It was almost as though Craig was lying about something, and all of a sudden he became the main suspect rather than the grieving fiancé.
Police looked to corroborate Smith's story. They located the medic who had bandaged his cut hand. He confirmed that Craig Smith had come in to be treated for a cut in the early morning hours of October 23rd. But the medic recalled thinking that the wound was consistent with having been caused by a jagged edge rather than a knife blade, as Smith suggested. Though incriminating, the information fell short of proving that Craig Smith was a killer. Now, looking to tie the suspect to the crime scene, police canvassed the nearby area.
I just have a couple questions for you, if you don't mind.
A clerk at a convenience store remembered seeing Smith and Susan Galloway the night she disappeared. And according to the clerk, they seemed to be arguing when they came into the store. They bought a few bottles of soda and then left.
We're going now.
The clerk showed the officer the type of soda purchased by the couple. They were 16-ounce bottles made of green glass, identical to the glass that had killed Susan Galloway. The information was enough for police to obtain a warrant to search Craig Smith's residence. The suspect continued to deny any involvement in Susan's death. He admitted he and Susan had been in the convenience store that night. And he also admitted that in the past, he had hung out at the area where her car was later found. But Smith denied ever being at the spot where the partially dug hole was found. The place police believe was the kill site. Detectives collected the clothing he wore on the night of Susan's disappearance.
Is that yours too?
Yes, that is.
But the items had been recently cleaned.
Is there a shirt in there also, Ken?
Police realized their only hope would be to link Smith to the sneaker print recovered from the trunk of Susan's car. They collected a single pair of muddy shoes. An examination revealed that the shoes seized from Craig Smith were the same size and the soles had the same pattern as those collected from the vehicle. But that alone wouldn't be enough to prove murder.
He had driven her car a number of times. His footprint was in an irregular place on the trunk, but it could have been there.
Police would have to physically place him at the kill site. And all they had to do that was some dirt on the bottom of Smith's shoes.
And it was our belief that if he had been standing in the area of the kill site, he would have picked up soil. It was very sandy and totally different from the mud and soil at the area where the car was pushed over.
Investigators collected soil samples from various locations where the suspect claimed to have been on the night of Susan's disappearance. They also collected samples from the spot where they believed the murder took place. All of the soil was sent to the University of Montana for analysis. There, geologist and mineralogist Jack Warenberg worked the case.
I was to examine crime scene soils, and there was a open burial site, and there were several other small areas that they wanted to be checked out to compare the soil that was present on the suspect's shoe.
Warenberg observed that the soil samples taken from the bottom of Smith's shoe contained tiny pieces of glass, probably from broken bottles. A microscopic analysis also revealed that the sample contained bits of ash that were consistent with having been produced by copper. The samples collected from Craig Smith's yard and from the path he had walked to the base had no such ash. In fact, only samples taken from the crime scene had both the tiny shards of glass and the copper ash. And the reason seemed simple. A few hundred yards from the crime scene, on the banks of the Missouri River, was the site of a copper smelting plant. Warenberg determined that it was the only area in the county where copper ash appears in the soil. Craig Smith had been at the kill site, something he had previously denied. When confronted with the evidence against him, Craig Smith admitted to killing his fiancée. He said he wanted the Galloway family business, but had no interest in being married to Susan. He was charged with first-degree murder. Based on the information, police believe that on the night of the murder, the couple got into a heated argument. Then, Craig Smith viciously attacked his fiancée. He then dragged her to a secluded spot to finish the job and bury his victim. But when that didn't work, he placed her in the trunk of her car and attempted to send the vehicle over the cliff. Craig Smith was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 100 years in prison. A patch of soil was enough for Montana police to expose a killer's dirty secret. But in Tennessee, detectives must look beyond the obvious in order to find answers to explain a mysterious death. In the early morning of December 23, 1997, Nashville police and emergency workers responded to a frantic 911 call. Terry Robinson said his wife had been violently ill for several days, and now she wasn't breathing. She was pronounced dead at the scene. With no obvious cause of death, detectives were dispatched to the home as a matter of routine.
Well,
Homicide detective E.J. Bernard was assigned the case. 33-year-old Lenora Robinson lay dead on the couple's bed. Investigators noticed a black substance on the woman's shirt and on the pillowcase that seemed to have come from the victim's mouth and nose. It didn't appear to be blood. Perhaps they thought it had originated from a cigarette found next to Lenora's bed. They also found and collected a bottle of Gatorade and a glass filled with the orange liquid. Terry Robinson told the detective that Lenora had been suffering from severe flu-like symptoms for the past 4 or 5 days. In fact, the day before, Terry had taken his wife to a doctor for treatment for a high fever and uncontrollable vomiting and diarrhea. The physician who examined Lenora diagnosed her with a bad case of the flu. He gave her an injection to relieve the symptoms and sent her home. Terry said that Lenora seemed better for a while, but that night her symptoms worsened. He tried to nurse her, giving her Gatorade and medications. But when he checked on her the following morning, she wasn't breathing. Though there were no signs suggesting foul play, police were troubled that someone as young as Lenora would die from the flu. Detective Bernard ordered that an autopsy be performed.
The initial assumption was that it was something to do with the flu or the shot, or possibly a heart attack, brain tumor, something totally unknown to the family members or anyone, the medical personnel on the scene.
Her body was transported to the Tennessee State Medical Examiner's office located in Nashville. There, Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Bruce Levy performed the autopsy. The thick black substance that had come from Lenora Robinson's nose immediately caught his attention.
Well, in this case, the first thing was there had been noticed some black residue on the pillow next to where her mouth had been, which means that something had come out of her body. We weren't sure exactly what it was.
An internal examination uncovered evidence of a heart condition and congested lungs, supporting the idea that Lenora had died of natural causes. Then, Detective Bernard arrived to view the autopsy. He noticed something unusual.
It smells like almonds or candy.
It does.
It was the smell of bitter almonds coming from the body. It was an odor associated with people who have died as a result of cyanide poisoning. Further examination, however, failed to turn up the telltale signs associated with cyanide ingestion. There was no liver damage and no signs of burning in the mouth or esophagus. Toxicology tests on the Gatorade found near Lenora's bed turned up negative for poison. If the 33-year-old woman had been exposed to cyanide, the question now was how and by whom. An autopsy performed on 33-year-old Lenora Robinson led authorities in Nashville, Tennessee to believe her death had resulted from exposure to cyanide. To prove it, additional tests would have to be performed. The medical examiner collected blood, tissue, and urine samples. The items were then forwarded to forensic toxicologists. To test for the presence of poison, the samples are mixed with chemicals that react to cyanide. If the poison is present, it will turn a bluish-purple color within a few minutes. The tissue samples turned up negative. But Lenora's blood and urine tested positive for the poison. For cyanide to be absorbed in the blood, but not in the tissue, it would have had to have been inhaled. And according to forensic expert Agent Louis Kuykendall, cyanide is most lethal in a mist-like state.
Typically, the person will have convulsions, the person will have stomach distress, but usually very quickly, 30 seconds to maybe 2 minutes, they're into a coma state and then die very rapidly.
Ugh, I swear my neighbors think I'm probably getting murdered right now.
Medical examiner Bruce Levy contacted police with the findings.
It's Bruce. Yeah, I have the results on the toxicology on Lenora Robinson. It is positive for cyanide.
But until police could rule out that the poisoning was accidental or suicide, the manner of death would remain undetermined. Detective E.J. Bernard was quickly able to rule out both of those scenarios.
There was no suicide notes. I learned that she would have died within minutes of ingesting the cyanide. Therefore, she would have left something close by. There was nothing close by. Mr. Robinson assured me that he did not clean anything up.
Stormy.
Police believed Lenora Robinson had been murdered. To find out why, they questioned the victim's mother and stepfather. Both agreed that the marriage had been rocky for some time. According to Lenore's mother, the couple suffered from severe financial problems. The small business that they owned and operated together was not doing well. And the bills continued to pile up. It had caused a lot of anger and resentment between Terry and Lenora. Lenora, they said, had recently begun talking about the possibility of divorce.
I will be talking to the two of you in the next trip that they have.
They had one more piece of information to add. Terry, they said, had once worked as an exterminator, and as part of his job, he had worked with deadly poisons.
He didn't have but a couple because before they married, he had...
Before obtaining a warrant to search Terry Robinson's home, police needed to know if it was possible for him to create cyanide vapor.
You'll actually see it in some of the pesticides, industrial pesticides especially. And so
Agent Kuykendall confirmed that the process is relatively simple.
you might go ahead and collect that.
He gave police a list of items to look out for. Armed with a warrant, police returned to Terry Robinson's home. The suspect maintained his innocence. But as Detective Bernard began sifting through the couple's financial papers, he uncovered a letter Lenora had written to her husband. In it, she threatened him with a bitter and costly divorce. With a list of chemicals that could be used to transform cyanide into vapor, Detective Bernard searched the suspect's garage. There, he found several common household items that could have been used. He also collected numerous containers of unidentified liquid. At the TBI crime lab, Agent Kuykendall began analyzing the substances collected from the home. But the results were not what investigators had hoped for.
Essentially what EJ found and sent to me None of those had cyanide or enough cyanide at any level that if someone was to ingest it or get them on, that it should harm them.
The investigation was back to square one. To make their case, police would have to rely on the circumstantial evidence. And their best bet would be to prove that the suspect had access to cyanide. Detectives contacted Terry Robinson's former employer at the extermination company where he had worked years earlier.
I need your help.
The man confirmed that while Robinson worked there, the company utilized cyanide. In fact, Terry Robinson helped convert the crystallized poison into a liquid state, which would then be administered with a mister to combat insects and rodents.
That stuff smells.
The former employer hadn't seen Terry in some time and wasn't aware of any poison he may have taken with him when he left the company.
That's all there is to it.
Sure.
Still, Detective E.J. Bernard refused to give up.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you very much. Well, I continued looking for the magic bean, we'll say, to where I could get a receipt where he bought cyanide. I was unable to locate that.
Though police had established motive and opportunity, they had no hard evidence linking Terry Robinson to the poison that was used to murder his wife. And without that, Lenora's murder threatened to remain unsolved. Forensic toxicologists in Nashville, Tennessee, had exposed the poisoning death of 33-year-old Lenora Robinson as a homicide. But so far, they had been unable to link her husband, Terry Robinson, to the cyanide gas used to kill her. But then they got the break they needed. Lenore Robinson's great-uncle came in to speak with police.
Just a few questions, if you don't mind. I believe your name is Roy Blanton.
He recalled that some time ago, Terry had asked for his help in killing wasps that had nested near his home.
Did he pay you for this?
Good to see you. Hi, what we got here?
The uncle agreed and came by the house to give Terry several insecticides and poisons. Among the items were cyanide tablets. Though the evidence was circumstantial at best, police were able to obtain a warrant for the arrest of Terry Robinson. On June 30th, police returned to his home and took him into custody. Terry Robinson was charged with the first-degree murder of his wife, Lenora. Based on the evidence, police believe that Terry Robinson took advantage of Lenora's illness to free himself from an unhappy marriage, heavy debt, and an impending divorce. On December 22nd, he made his way into her bedroom and administered the deadly poison. On October 15th, 1999, 49-year-old Terry Robinson was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 51 years in prison. To trap a killer and make their case, police in Nashville had to rely on both hard science and dogged determination. But some predators have an intimate knowledge of law enforcement tactics, and outwitting them can be a difficult challenge. With a population of less than 8,000 residents, Belpre, Ohio is regarded as a friendly, tight-knit community. And when someone goes missing, it's everyone's business. On September 19, 1996, Jack McCready came in to speak with Belpre police. Investigators knew him well. McCready was a respected officer with the Ohio State Police. And now he wanted to report that his wife Jennifer had disappeared. He said he last saw his wife that morning as they were getting ready to go to work. Jack said he hadn't noticed anything unusual about her behavior that morning. Though their marriage had its problems, he thought things had improved.
There you go.
Thanks.
All right, I really got to get
He later learned that Jennifer never showed up to work that day. Jack suspected his wife had been having an affair, and now he feared she had taken off with another man, leaving him with the couple's 2 children. Detective 𝙀𝙬𝙚𝙀𝐿 agreed.
When he got home, the first thing he saw was Jennifer's wedding band on the kitchen counter. He checked the house and found out that there were certain items of hers missing, luggage was missing, and the photographs was missing.
Though police had no reason to suspect foul play, they agreed to look into the case. They began by questioning the McCrady's neighbors. One believed he had seen Jennifer leaving the house that morning. Around 10 a.m., he saw Jennifer's Blazer back out of the driveway and screech down the street in an erratic manner. The neighbor admitted that he never actually saw Jennifer's face.
Okay.
But he knew the Blazer was her car, and he had never seen anyone else drive it.
All right, thank you.
Then, a few days later, police received a call that a vehicle matching Jennifer's Blazer had been located in a parking lot. Jack McCrady was dispatched to the scene, and he confirmed that it was in fact his wife's car. Investigators searched the vehicle's interior. They found no obvious signs of a struggle or any indications of foul play. Still, the vehicle was impounded for a more thorough analysis. Crime scene technicians scoured the vehicle using luminol, a chemical that can detect invisible traces of blood and other biological evidence. But after hours of processing, the examination revealed nothing to suggest that a crime had taken place. As an adult, Jennifer McCrady had the right to be missing. And having found no evidence that she had met with foul play, Belpre police had no choice but to give up on their search for the young mother of 2. Detectives in Belpre, Ohio had found nothing to suggest that the missing wife of State Police Officer Jack McCrady had met with foul play.
Yes.
All indications suggested the 30-year-old mother of 2 had simply packed up and left town.
The vehicle that's out there now.
But then, friends of the missing woman contacted police. They were concerned something bad had happened to Jennifer McCrady. Jennifer, they said, was dedicated to her children. They were her life. No one who knew her could believe that she would just walk out on her children. And no one believed she was having an affair, as Jack McCrady suggested. But Jennifer had been talking about divorcing her possessive and jealous husband. Then, a witness came forward with information. She said that around the time of Jennifer's disappearance, she saw a police vehicle driving in a remote area a few miles outside of town. The officer fit the description of Jack McCrady to a T. The woman had provided unreliable information in the past, and at first, Detective 𝙀𝙬𝙚𝐀 didn't believe this would be any different. But when no additional leads surfaced, detectives decided to drive out to the secluded spot where the woman had seen the patrol car. There, they found something that seemed out of place.
What we can do is...
It was a dirt mound. they shoveled away a few inches of dirt and hit a vinyl cloth. That was followed by the unmistakable smell of death. Crime scene technicians were quickly dispatched to the scene. As the excavation continued, the team unearthed a comforter and a sleeping bag. And wrapped inside were decomposed remains, the head covered with a white plastic trash bag. When the bag was removed, one of the officers identified the female as Jennifer McCready.
What we want to do now is...
She was wearing pajamas. That was at odds with her husband's claim that when he last saw her, she was dressed and leaving for work. As a matter of routine, soil samples were collected from the makeshift grave. Technicians collected the bedding and the sleeping bag for a more detailed analysis. The victim was transported to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. The medical examiner determined that Jennifer McCready had died as a result of a gunshot wound to her head. The fatal .357 Magnum bullet was collected and sent to the crime lab. Belpre investigators now had a homicide on their hands.
If you could slap one character for their dumb decisions, who would it be? Huh? Go on. Vent in the comments. I can't wait to read.
The inconsistent information, in addition to witness testimony, pointed to State Police Officer Jack McCready as the prime suspect.
I've got some bad news for you, Jack.
Detectives arranged to speak with him at the barracks where he was stationed.
You understand?
When they broke the news about Jennifer's death, he was visibly shaken.
You guys as a family, at this point...
But as they began to
I think
question
it'd
him,
be best,
McCready asked for an attorney and ended the interview. Soon after, Jack McCready was put on leave. Investigators hoped the forensic evidence could tell them more. All of the items collected from the crime scene were sent to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Apprehension Lab for analysis. While processing the evidence, criminalist Michelle Yezo discovered dozens of synthetic fibers. She also located strands of fiberglass clinging to the inside of the sleeping bag.
Finding the fiberglass insulation within that sleeping bag was something that was very unusual in my opinion, because that would be very itchy. And because of that, that's not something that you would want to have in that sort of context.
Police obtained a warrant to search the McCready home.
Let you look it over. Take a look at it.
In the bedroom, they found linens that matched the comforter the victim had been buried in. Several fibers were also collected for comparison with those recovered from the crime scene. In the kitchen, police located a .357 Magnum revolver, the same type of gun used to kill Jennifer McCready. As the search continued, investigators found and collected newly installed fiberglass insulation in the couple's garage. The material appeared identical to the insulation found in the sleeping bag. Then they noticed another potential clue. There were numerous shovels, and some were coated with dirt. Though McCready explained that he had recently done work on his yard, police confiscated the tools. Now, forensic examiners began analyzing all of the evidence. Michelle Yezo found that the carpet fibers collected from the McCready home shared all the same microscopic characteristics as those recovered from the bedding that the victim had been buried in. All of the evidence suggested the victim was murdered in her own home. But none of it told them who had carried out the homicide. And their best chance of linking Jack McCready to the murder turned out to be a dead end. The gun barrel had been bored out, making ballistic comparisons nearly impossible. Police had underestimated Jack McCready.
I don't see anything in there that says that it was...
The suspect had been clever enough to tamper with the one piece of evidence that could directly tie him to the murder. Or so he thought. Police contacted Richard Bisbing, a forensic microscopist with the private firm of McCrone Associates. He was asked to compare soil samples that were collected from the gravesite, Jack McCready's shovel, and from the suspect's yard.
We analyzed soil samples by doing a side-by-side careful comparison of all the details that we can find in the soil itself. The soil differs by color and by the presence of plant material. It differs by its mineral content. It differs by its texture, the particle sizes in the soil grains themselves. And all of those features are compared.
Bisbing began his analysis by comparing the soil taken from McCready's shovel to samples taken from his yard. But the texture, size, color, and mineral composition of the two samples did not match. But when he compared the soil from the gravesite with the soil taken from the shovel, he found one consistency after another.
We could conclude that the soil from the shovel was similar to the gravesite and could have originated from the gravesite. And we were able to show that the place of the gravesite was different in its soil classification even from the place where the defendant lived, and the soil was different than most places in the county.
A short while later, Ohio State Police Officer Jack McCready was placed under arrest and charged with the murder of his wife, Jennifer. Though police remain unsure what drove him to murder, the evidence suggests that on the evening of September 18th, Jack McCready shot Jennifer one time in the head. To cover up his actions, he buried her in a remote spot, returned home, and altered the barrel of his gun. Despite his efforts, Jack McCready was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Some killers will go to extraordinary lengths to distance themselves from their deeds. But no crime is perfect. And sometimes, investigators must rely on a few molecules in order to piece together the elements of murder.
Be honest. Did you watch the last scene through your fingers? Comment yes or no.